Once this emulsion is mixed, you do not have to mix it anymore. It will be mixed for the life of the emulsion. So you only need to mix the emulsion once. That's why we want to make sure to mix it very, very good the first time. Once mixed, scrape off your stir stick. Make sure that your emulsion is all uniform in color. You cannot see any dyes or streaks in there whatsoever. Put your stir stick to the side. Then we're going to want to come and see, if you see the emulsion right now, it has bubbles in it. Those are air bubbles from us mixing in the emulsion. We want to make sure that all those bubbles get out of the emulsion before we put it on our screen. So you're going to want to let the emulsion probably sit overnight. If you can't afford to let it sit overnight, probably at least 2 to 4 hours. Probably along the edge of 4 hours, I would recommend. So you want to, don't put the cap on all the way. You want to just put the cap on like this to give the emulsion a little bit room to breathe and let those air bubbles evaporate out. And then you're going to want to store this in a light, safe environment, of course. And once all those air bubbles are evaporated out, then we can then go and start using this emulsion. If you're not going to be going through a lot of emulsion, one good idea to do is to take a Sharpie marker and just mark what the date that you mixed this emulsion. That way, if it's getting to be old, like 5 or 6 months down the road, you can actually go back and see the date that you mixed it. So once it's past 5 months, you're going to probably not get very good exposure results. That's because the emulsion is getting old and it's past its shelf life. Now that our screens are degreased and dry, we're going to go over the emulsion coating process. However, before we go over this process, I first want to share with you guys the different types of screens and the different kinds of screen meshes and mesh sizes, and to kind of go over what can be used for what applications, so you guys know a little bit about that. First of all, there are two types of frames for the screens. There are wood frames and there are aluminum frames. Now, wood frames, they've been around a lot longer than aluminum. They hold up very, very well. They're very strong. However, there's a couple of disadvantages to wood frames. The advantage to them is they're usually cheaper, and you can usually buy more of them. They're more readily available sometimes from certain companies, and a lot of shops have a lot of wood frames. Me personally, I love using wood frames. I like buying the cheaper frame, so I've always used wood versus aluminum. However, they have a little bit of disadvantages. If you're soaking them in a lot of water, wood has the tendency to warp a little bit. So once your screen is warped, it's not going to sit flat on your exposure unit or flat on your screen press, and you'll have a hard time using that screen. Also, they cannot be stretched, restretched that easily. Now, the screen mesh is stretched across the screen using a glue adhesive. It's usually a two-part activator that uses to glue the mesh to either the wood or the aluminum. It's stretched very, very tightly by automatic machines, so that if you feel a screen and feel the tension of a screen, how tight the screen is called on the actual frame is called tension. And that's measured in what a measurement unit called newtons. The only way you can measure that is to have a tension meter, however, but you usually want your screen tension when you get them at first. They're probably going to be around between 20 and 24, depending on the mesh size. But you can definitely feel a tight screen, and then as you start doing a lot of printing impressions, as the screen starts to get older and that mesh starts to get used quite a bit, you'll start to be able to poke, and you'll start to feel a lot more give in the screen mesh. When that screen mesh starts to give a lot, your screen's going to be to the end of its life range. You can still use the screen for like your one color jobs. However, if you're using the screen for your multiple color jobs, it's not going to register properly because that mesh is going to actually move when you pull the squeegee across it. So you want to keep, for your multiple color jobs, you want to always have very, very tight tension screens. Now, a couple advantages to the aluminum frame is that they will not warp in water, and you can send them back to the screen manufacturer. We also do that. That's part of our services to get restretched. So let's say you pop a hole in your screen when you're moving it around and you ruin it, or if you apply too much pressure, or after a couple thousand imprints, the screen's going to tend to rip because it just gets old and worn out. You can save screens up, maybe 6 to 12 of them at a time, and send them back to us, and they can be restretched for less than half the cost of the initial frame. So, and that also depends on mesh size, which we'll talk about next. But aluminum frames are good to have if you're going to be using them for a long period of time. The wood, cheaper, great to have for short jobs, longer run jobs. If you're going to be doing a screen and it's going to be printed over and over again, you're going to rinse it out and keep it categorized. It's going to be great for wood because you're not going to have to keep rinsing that out and being exposed to water. Wood's going to work great for that job. However, you're going to be using the screen for a lot of different designs. Maybe you want to go with aluminum. Now we're going to talk about screen mesh size. Now, you'll notice that when you go on our website or go look at a screen manufacturer, they talk about different screen mesh sizes. Now, your typical standard screen mesh size starts at 110. That means there's 110 threads, they're cross threads, one going that way, one going this way, per square inch. A 110 mesh is a fairly open mesh, so that this screen here is a 230 mesh. That means they're a lot finer threads and they're a lot closer together. 230 threads through square inch. Now, if you're doing your basic text design, basic logos, basic cartoon drawings, 110 mesh is pretty much your standard screen. You might want to go up to a 155 mesh if you're getting a little bit higher detail. But 110 mesh to 155 is what you're going to use for all your text stuff, all your logos, everything like that. All your flash plates as well. Now your higher mesh, 200, 230, 305, they're used for very, very fine detail or printing on halftones. Like a 230 or a 305 is used for printing on halftones or fine detail. This mesh is also, if you notice, it's yellow. Now a yellow mesh exposes better to the screen. A white mesh doesn't expose as good. That's why you'll find white mesh, the kind of screens that we sell, the white mesh are always the lower meshes. Now, let me explain that to you guys. When you expose this or expose this to light, a white mesh, the white threads actually act as transmitters to the light. So they'll bring light from this end of the screen to this end of the screen by once the exposure, like the exposure part of the screen will actually transmit light through the fibers. The yellow mesh blocks that light transmission. So when you're exposing it, you're not going to get light running through your screen. So if you're exposing really fine detail, that's why we sell all the higher meshes, because higher meshes are used for fine detail. We always sell them in yellow or orange mesh. Most of the time it's yellow mesh. But when you're exposing big block images or exposing text or cartoons with a white mesh, it doesn't matter if you get a little bit of light running through the screen because you're not exposing fine detail anyway. And it's very, very small amount of light, so it's only going to matter when you're exposing very, very fine detail. That's why, once again, all the higher meshes are yellow mesh. One more thing that I also like to talk about with a mesh is the type of ink you're using. If you're using a textile ink like a plastisol ink or a white ink, you're going to want to use the 110 to 155 mesh, especially with the white ink with the white flash plates, which we're going to show later on in the video. However, if you're using like maybe a graphic ink or a process ink, the ink's usually a lot thinner. So you might want to use a higher mesh so it will allow less ink to pass through the screen mesh. Because if you use a really thin ink with a 110 mesh, it's just going to drop through design, it's going to flood onto your t-shirt. So you want to use a higher mesh with the graphic inks, like if you're printing signs or stickers or anything like that. And if you're printing process prints, obviously the process ink's going to be much, much thinner. And once again, if you guys want to learn more about how to print process, I definitely would recommend the Intro to Process DVD that we sell on our website, because that goes over all of this. If you know something is not making sense to you, that DVD is going to cover it on how to print process print, which is printing a full color image using the high mesh 305 screens. There's lower meshes as well, like 81, 60, 40 mesh. Those meshes are very, very open, and they're used for printing, like an 81 mesh is used for printing high density. If you really, really want a thick layer of white or a thick layer of black on the t-shirt, you would use maybe a 81 mesh. If you want to print with glitters or shimmers, shimmers are usually printed through the 81 mesh. Now the big glitter particles, the glitter inks, you have to usually print those through a 40 mesh or a 60 mesh. So there's different types of mesh for different reasons. You're going to want to research this a little bit on your own, read about that. You can find information on our website, silkscreeningsupplies.com.